Hello, my fellow readers. I Dark Symphony 777 with another fanfiction review. As always, a link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts of the story, and finally, listen to my opinion. My opinion is not indicative of everyone in the world, so please respect that. Also, for this video, excuse me if I sound off. I'm actually dealing with a very bad fever, so I may inadvertently kind of screw up a bit, or maybe take like more pauses than normal. I'm trying to collect my thoughts through the haze. But the story I am doing a review of is Scooby Doo and the Beauregard game by Sponge Addict. It is a Scooby Doo fan fiction, and I have to say up front, this is actually a really good story. No, really, it is. But before I get into the actual novel, the actual fan fiction itself, I have to actually discuss something that's actually important to the story, because this story is actually inspired by a very, very famous novel called "And Then There Were None" by Agatha Christie. It is anyone who has heard of mystery novels or even read them has heard of this book. It is arguably one of the most famous mystery novels ever written. Despite the fact I have personally have never actually read it, I have heard of it. It is actually a book that was inspired by the poem "The 10 Little Soldier Boys," or if you want, or if you prefer, "The 10 Little Engines." And well, I think like the only thing I know of it is at the end when they discover the phrase "Ewan Owen was here," which was supposed to be "Oh, unknown," and then that entire phrase got co-opted by a lolly vampire with Christmas tree Christmas tree lights for wings. But what does that have to do with Scooby Doo and the Beauregard game? Well, because one, this story actually takes very much inspiration from "And Then There Were One" to the point where it's an actual plot point, but it also uses a lot of the famous poem "The 10 Little Soldier Boys" as a pivotal plot point. So in essence, this story can be kindly registered as a Scooby Doo take of "And Then There Were None." Okay? Okay. So let's start the review. The plot actually follows during the start of summer break when Scooby, Shaggy, Velma, Daphne, and Fred, they've been split up for about a year. They decide to come back together and hang out and catch up during summer break. As they were entering Coolsville, Shaggy gets a call from his mother that they see him since he's going to be in the area. It's like, well, I'm going to hang out with my friends. It's like, no, I don't know. This is important. Now, Shaggy decides to call the rest of the gang, saying, "Hey, can you meet me at my mother's house?" Like, okay. They all decide to go. Where Shaggy's mother, Paula, decides to drop some heavy news. His family member named Sergeant is it Thomas Beauregard? I think it's Thomas Beauregard. Anyway, regardless, a relative by the name of Beauregard passed away, and they got a letter saying that all members of the Beauregard family are invited to this mansion in Louisiana, and the whole game is set up. The whole thing is set up as all members of the Beauregard family have to stay in the house, and then whichever one stays in the house gets the house. Get it? Got it? Okay. So they decide to all go. Fred, Daphne, and Velma decide to politely ask Paula if they can come with. Paula decides, yeah, sure, why not? And so they all go. They meet the rest of Shaggy's family. They find out a little bit about Shaggy's history. Turns out in this story, which is kind of prophetic because it is kind of implied in, at least in the "Where Are You" universe, because Scooby Doo has like multiple universes, and I don't know which universe is in which. I don't even, truth be told, I don't even know which story this story takes place in. I assume Mystery Incorporated because they mentioned Nova and Fred's family is like a mayor, but I could be wrong with that. Basically, Shaggy's ancestry can actually be traced back to the Confederacy, i.e., slave labor. Shaggy does not like this, understandably so. And so they meet the rest of the family. They're, none of the other members really trust each other. There is a major thematic element of communication. It actually carries out throughout the entire story. I'll get more about that later, but just bear with me. While they're there, they come across the poem. Daphne actually recognizes it, but can't name the top off it. It's the 10 Little Soldier Boys. Keep that in mind. And so over the course, about a week or so, each family member of each Beauregard member is actually removed from the equation. Basically, in a very not life-threatening way. For instance, in the book, I at least remember the first person who dies from ingesting cyanide. In this story, the guy just inadvertently has an allergic reaction, and they kind of save him. He has to leave. So there's that. But immediately, all the family members start pointing the finger at each other, thinking, "Oh, you did it! No, you did it! You did it! You did it!" Basically, one gigantic Spider-Man pointing me, thinking, "Oh, everyone wants the house and the land on it." Eventually, they find out that there is a ghost, as a Scooby Doo tradition. Shaggy immediately thinks it's a ghost. Everyone's like, "Nah, it ain't a ghost." Spoiler: it ain't a ghost, as always, or at least 99% of the time. And they try to figure out the truth behind who was behind the whole thing, using the clues that are left behind. Eventually, they actually use plot points of the Soldier Boy by connecting it with them. Then there could be none by pointing out how plot points in that book are correlating with this. So it's like, oh, it's probably one of the members, and they're just faking it. Spoiler: that's actually what happens. And eventually, they do go to the guest house, which was built over a sinkhole. At the time when it was built, they didn't know about sinkholes, so there. And they actually escape. Daphne's like knocked out because of hypnotism. Shaggy has his arms separated, but they manage to survive. They run into the ghost of Beauregard. They manage to capture him. They find out it's Shaggy's uncle William, and eventually the story kind of ends up on a actual legitimate cliffhanger with the chauffeur Beaufort giving Shaggy a history book and telling him about his history. It's like, if you want to find out and progress in your future, learn about your past. That sort of deal. Not exactly those words, but roundabout there. And it does eventually end on a cliffhanger with Shaggy finding this special medallion hidden underneath the Beauregard family Confederate outfit. Say that we can have this, and decided to keep it because it's probably important. So that's a rough estimate of the plot. I don't want to actually spoil things, because if I spoil things here, I may actually spoil things, and then there could be one. I know that book is actually really good, so it's like I don't want to spoil both of them, even accidentally. So I'm not gonna touch upon specific plot points, because it's a very bare bones plot. It's a very well done bare bones plot, but at the end of the day, it's a really well crafted story that sells a more adult version of Mystery Incorporated, but still retaining that at least a little hint of the old school Scooby Doo. I'll talk more about that near the end, because I do want to bring that up, but bear with me as we get there. I do think it's fine. I have nothing wrong with the plot, except for a small running gag where they kind of poke fun at Fred's pronunciation of treasure. He says it as treasure or treasure. This is mainly due to the fact I believe Frank Walker had a unique distinction of saying treasure. He said it a completely different way. Uh, and honestly, that joke specifically didn't land because that's more of an auditorial joke, and some jokes like that just simply don't land in written word. I'm not blaming the author for this because honestly, it is something canonically Fred has actually said. If you actually go back and watch a lot of the episodes of let's say like Where Are You, or even like later shows, because Frank Welker is still the only original actor who's still portraying the same Scooby Doo character. Everyone else has either passed away or retired. But Frank Welker is still playing Fred, so I still think he still says the word treasure in that distinct way. But yeah, it is in character for Fred to say treasure, treasure, terrier in that distinct way. It just didn't land for me. So I'm not gonna hate the author for doing something creative. No harm, no foul. Characters. Now there is a lot of characters in this story, but I want to focus on Shaggy and Velma. These are the two important characters in the story. Everyone else is important. They all play their roles really, really well, but they don't have anything worth talking about in detail compared to Shaggy and Velma. First off, with their Shaggy. Okay, add to laundry. With Shaggy, there is the revelation that his family has slave labor ties because the whole place takes place in the South. This also ties into canonically, it's implied that Shaggy's family was involved in that years ago because if you ever watched Scooby Doo and the Boo Brothers, he did have relatives that were connected that also took place in a similar location. And that movie with the Beauregard name and uh, that family member did have Confederate. There was a lot of he wore like a Confederate outfit. There were like statues and stuff. So it is rooted in possible canon. Again, this kind of medieval the whole thing with which universe this takes place in because it could be Mystery Incorporated. It could be Where Are You? It could be like Where Are You or this own custom universe. I'm actually kind of curious about that. But yeah, Shaggy when he finds out about it's like, hey, you didn't tell me because he's talking to his mother. You didn't tell me my family had connections to the Civil War, to the Confederacy, to slavery, and you didn't tell me. That's a legitimate, realistic concern. That's actually what I think is the best part about the story is how realistically behaving all the characters are. Not even Shaggy at all. Every single character in this story behaves in an incredibly realistic way. From Freddy Daphne's their very slightly amorous affections to how they treat everyone around them to Aunt Louisiana's, hypocritical Christian ways. Like she's constantly talking about like another relative of hers who is lesbian, but then everyone kind of points out like, didn't God also like God doesn't say women should love women? God also said you shouldn't be breaking up with your loved ones. Like, well, I didn't break up with my husband. Which one? To Williams, even Uncle Williams, who turned out to be the bad guy, he has a understandably realistic motive behind the whole thing. I'll talk about him in a little bit. I'm going to add him to Velma and Shaggy, but Shaggy and Velma's little characters and how they behave and how they move is so well done in this story. I have nothing bad to say. So back to Shaggy. Shaggy is understandably mad that where his family came from. However, on the flip side, it's also very realistic because Paula openly admits to Shaggy that she left that side of the family because of said ties. So it's a very realistic take on a broken family instead of this over the top thing. It's just how would these characters behave in real life, full of hypocrisy and strict nuance and all that. Uh, It's how everything plays out. So, and that kind of stretches across the entire story. You have Shaggy constantly. How do I? How do I say it? He constantly, kind of gets mad whenever he's reminded of it, but he's also trying to focus on the job at hand. So he's kind of floating in and out of the whole thing. So it's like, oh, if it's brought up, he gets a flash of waiver, but he's trying to hold it in because that's not what's needed. That's not what's needed right now. That's not what's needed right now. When it comes to Velma, and a very big plot point that happened in the story was Velma hiding her school life, her semester life in college from everyone. And it also hammers point the theme. I'm going to talk about that again. We'll talk about it a little bit with the reveal that she also had a very human reaction. Basically, she went to college. She was expecting to do very well, and her first semester she completely aced everything. But in her second semester, she took a very, very advanced class called quantum mechanics, and she hit a brick wall. And she was struggling very hard because she was used to nailing everything really easily. So it was a very realistic scenario. When she finally hit a brick wall, she devoted so much time to it. Her other classes were actually starting to suffer. She specifically mentions chemistry, but I'm gonna soft assume the other classes probably were suffering as well. Just not as bad as chemistry. And so once she realized that her chemistry grades were completely tanking, she went to went to get a cheat sheet for the midterm exam. They caught her, they suspended her. Now she's actually contemplating dropping out of college because of all the abject shame. That's a very realistic expectation for Velma's character, like someone who's so used to get kind of being so smart that you weren't gonna hit a brick wall, and then Velma completely floundering and uh, kind of mentally falling apart once she eventually hit a brick wall, something she couldn't understand. It's a very realistic take. And even Uncle Williams, his whole motive behind the whole thing is he would he heard rumors of no, he believed himself into thinking there was a big treasure at the Beauregard estate. However, Mr. Sir Beauregard basically said there's no treasure here. They got into an argument. Sir Beauregard's heart actually gave out because apparently his heart gave out. William actually found out that they were actually going to turn the entire location into a museum as reparations, and so he decided to try and find a way to manipulate everything so he can get the estate, so he can find the treasure that's been hidden for so long. So he manipulated everything to just be able to make it more realistic. The other thing he wasn't counting on was the fact that Velma, Daphne, and Fred were joining. He was even accounting for both Shaggy and Scooby to come because it was a a matter. So they were there's possibly they were going to get involved. And also, he also wasn't expecting the other family members to be suspicious of him as well because there was Frank and Louisa who actually lived nearby the estate, so they kind of actually implied to have met the uncle several times, and so they were kind of immediately suspicious. Like, hey, wait a minute, wait a minute. So even if, say, he won against Mystery Incorporated, the story already pretty much implied that Louisa and Frank kind of already had all the proof they needed, and were already getting the cops. And so how he failed in this story was more a result of him having to think on the fly against factors he didn't expect. Again, a very realistic response. It's a really well done story character wise. I didn't touch on every other character because at least is more minor in their role, including Scooby, Daphne, and Fred, but they're still really well done and how the author writes them in their roles. Even the end, and this is the other thing I want to talk about. The other slightly bad thing I want to talk about, but this one can also depend on from person to person is William confronting Shaggy. He basically starts. It's at the end of the story. They get into the basement through the hallway connecting the guest house to the main building. William dresses as Beauregard, starts shouting starting the full poem, shoots out a light with Shaggy, holds him on noose because that's what the final line of the 10 Little Soldier Boys is. There were one, and then he hung himself, and then there were none. And just jumps on Shaggy. Scooby attacks, finds out, oh, he ain't ghost. And the rest of them just kind of dogpile him and just tie him up really easily. That come off as anticlimactic. However, I do think that it is anticlimactic on purpose, as opposed to convey the fact that no matter what, William was kind of screwed because he was kind of out of his depth because he was trying to account for so many factors that he wasn't accounting on, and the fact the whole unexpectedness of the whole thing, trying to make things work, it does make it anticlimactic on purpose. It also fits the main theme of communication. I might get that, but give me a second for that. Grammar wise, didn't find any grammar. Pacing wise and sentence structure wise, I will say this: it's paced very slowly, despite it being just under 70,000 words. This is a very picture perfect example of the author making every word count. Not a single sentence is wasted. Not a single chapter is wasted. Not a single moment is wasted. Even the core theme of communication, because that's ultimately the crux of everything that happens. The whole conflict between Shaggy and his mom over the whole slave thing happened because of miscommunication. Because Paula didn't tell Shaggy about their family history, because Paula wanted to distance herself from the rest of her family. More communications. The entire family is incredibly fractured because instead of talking things out, they just bury everything and just don't bother talking to each other. So that's everything build up over the course of many moons. Velma's issues with the college, hiding everything and trying not to communicate with because she's afraid that they might treat her as someone who failed, who is less than who Velma Dinkley was. Everything about this story, from a story to a character to everything, every single bit of the story is drenched in the idea that everyone is miscommunicating with each other, and that makes a very tense and deep story, despite how short ultimately this fan fiction is. It's a very well crafted, very tightly written story that I have no complaints. Even the whole treasure thing, I can see the point of it. I can see the point of that. I don't really have a complaint on that because trying to make it's Fred. He says it that way. So, would I recommend this story? 100%. I do think this is one of the best fan fictions I read this year, bar none. And I have nothing bad to say about it. Favorite part of the story, I would actually have to say Velma's confession of revealing what happened at college with her having to hit that brick wall. It's very realistic. And even till the end, she's so distraught over afraid of what Fred, Daphne, and Shaggy will think of her when she reveals it, that it takes Scooby literally just kind of begging her. It's like, you don't have to tell them, tell me. And basically just sitting there, letting her and telling her to take her time. And Velma even a little neat detail of Scooby kind of getting everyone to sit down and even positioning himself that Velma is actually has her back against them. And whenever and Daphne actually tries to interrupt, and Scooby just glares at her. It's like, It's the little details of that part that makes it so good. And even the whole reveal, it's a very well crafted reveal. Like everything from Velma describing specifically what happened to how she feels about it to the insecurity she's been dealing with. It's all drenched in this very realistic filter that makes you care about Velma. Like you just want to reach out and give her a hug. And it's basically what everyone else does. Like Scooby hugs her, and then Fred, Daphne, and Shaggy all like to reach around. And it's like we won't think anything of you. It's a really brilliant part of the story that I think it should at least be looked at. Even if you don't read the entire story, read this part. It's a really well written part. Would I change anything? No. Even if I would want to change, you could make an argument over the over the end with when William in disguise confronts them. That could be interpreted as like very anticlimactic. I personally think it's meant to be that on purpose, but I can see people saying that that's very underwhelming and fits more with what Scooby Doo would be in the more cartoony sense. But this is supposed to be more realistic. I think it's on purpose. That's just what I think. So I personally wouldn't change it, but I can see the argument being made for someone to change it. That's honestly Scooby Doo and the Beauregard game. I think it's a really great story, very tightly written. I When I get to like the top 10 stories of this year, this story is definitely going to be in there because I can't. There's going to be honestly, I think this year may be like one of the toughest years when it comes to fan fiction. Spoiler alert: there's like tons of highs, but there's also very lows. So it's going to be very, very up in the air on what I'm going to be putting into this year. But yeah, that is Scooby Doo and the Beauregard game. This has been Dark Symphony 777 and cut.